Welcome to Ink and Magic, a podcast where we read and discuss the writing craft, world building, and romance of paranormal and fantasy novels.
If you love books with bite, set in worlds of magic and mayhem, then you're in the right place. My name's Nikisha Shanae. I go by Ines.
And I'm Leslye. I write as Elle Penelope. And welcome to the show.
Hey, Leslye.
Hey, Ines. How's it going?
It's going well. At the time that we're recording this, fall has come, or autumn has fallen.
Yeah, with a vengeance. It's getting cold in these parts.
Yeah.
DC area.
For the first time, I have a new car, and I turned on the seat warmers, because if I got in the car and I was like, it's cold. And I was like, wait, I've got seat warmers again.
That is one of man's wonderful inventions, seat warmers, seat coolers, which I've had and I do not currently have, also a great thing, and steering wheel warmers, which I use all the time. Yeah.
I wonder if I have. I don't know how to work my car completely. I might have to check that out.
All of the lovely inventions of the world. Speaking of worlds, that was a good transition, wasn't it?
Good job.
That's why they pay me the big bucks. Not. We're talking about world building, but specifically for romance today, because whether or not you are doing fantasy and paranormal romance, world building is important for everyone. I have this workshop that I've been giving the past couple of years called World Building for Any Genre, which just talks about the importance for any genre. But world building specifically for romance can be a really great tool to increase the depth of the characters, to create conflict in the romantic plot line, heighten emotions. There's all kinds of things that are like writerly craft type things that really can come across very strongly through the world and through the world building that you're doing. So that is what
are you talking about we're going to have to sit down and write down like the currencies and what the government is and all that stuff?
You make that stuff sound not exciting, and it's very cool, but not necessarily. Creating new currencies, I mean, you're not intrigued by that?
No.
Okay, well, maybe that's just me. But no, that's not necessarily what we're talking about, although that can be a part of it if you are interested. But so when I talk about world building, world building is the umbrella term. Setting is inside of that. Setting is where your story takes place. And we're mostly talking about that, but the larger world stuff comes into this as well. And that can be culture, that can be language, nation. You can kind of extrapolate from the setting, the larger world that your story takes place within, and have that be also a way to create conflict and to heighten emotions and to do all of those good things. But yeah, emotion, like we read for emotion and we read romance for emotion. And so thinking about, okay, there's many different ways that you can create emotion, especially in a romance novel, but thinking about the setting, thinking about where each scene is taking place, where the entire story is taking place, can help to create more emotion.
I can see that. I know you've talked before about how characters, how they behave and how they interact with each other, that could help to set the scene, especially and not just like in something contemporary, but also when you're dealing with like the rules of magic, which again, Leslye has been called a masterclass in world building because she makes a lot of amazing a lot of magic systems.
Yeah, I like magic systems. I like the details of world building, but it can be as simple as like looking at your tropes, in romantasy and fantasy and paranormal romance. Enemies to lovers is a huge trope. I've done like star-crossed lovers. Your tropes have the conflict built in. And so taking that, like I thought about, why are these characters enemies? So like, why are these characters enemies? That means there are two groups, whether they're nations or families in conflict, and that can have world building implications. So in my first novel, Song of Blood and Stone, I have these star-crossed lovers. We've got two countries that have been at war for 500 years. And then in my more recent series, The Bliss Wars, which is like a more futuristic version of San Francisco with shifters, we have different clans that have been fighting. They're different shifter clans. You can have obviously many types of conflict groups. And so, okay, what is the reason why these nations, these clans, these groups, these shifters don't get along? And build your world out of that. And then you'll find more and more reasons for these characters not to get along, to be on the opposite sides of some kind of conflict, and fit to be the absolute worst person that they can fall in love with, which is ideally what you're striving for in a high conflict romance situation.
So you brought up tropes and world building. So enemies to lovers makes sense to me. Enemies to lovers and opposites attract, which I kind of group together a lot. So
Hmm.
if one person lives, I don't know, in a sunshining world and the other person lives in the world of darkness, the the same that says opposites to me.
Right. Like
Yeah.
your Hades Persephone kind of story.
Yes, exactly. Hey, literally that. So with Hades and Persephone, Persephone, the princess of spring, basically, and Hades, the god of the underworld, and he stole her. And that gave a reason for the seasons that, when it has to go to the underworld, the world above is fallow, and when she comes back, it's spring. So I totally see that. But then let's take it to something broader than that. Like, my favorite trope is marriage of convenience.
Hmm.
And I think you can world build with that too. Like there are sometimes reasons why characters have to get married or why they shouldn't get married or why one thing will make them forced to get married. Like think about historical romances
Hmm.
where if a woman is like her virginity is the prize
Right.
and she has to protect it at all costs. And if that is if it's taken from her, it's or if she gives it up, her world basically is going to change. But think about like if you have I've read some books where it's the opposite, where the male is virtuous and the
Oh.
heroine is like, come on, let's go right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can use that. Like in a historical, you have this world, especially like the Regencies and the Victorian era ones, which are the ones we most often talk about. You have a world that you have to create where women don't own property, they can't have jobs in large part. The social structures are very strict. So if they don't get married, it's hard for them to live well. They'll be impoverished often. If like the women who are like the spinsters are usually poor because there's no man and they can't really make a living.
But also, because it's interesting too, because how you can play with that. Like if there
Hmm.
is like, remember like how there was either um men were marrying for money, like they would
Right.
marry the woman for money or for land, or there was a time when the new money from America, they were going after that new money and bringing them over, and those women were not the, what did they call them? The blushing English
Oh, roses or whatever.
roses.
Yeah, so deal with culture. So like English culture was very stuffy at that time, but American culture, they were kind of more lower class almost, or they were viewed as lower, even if they were rich. So there are some books, I can't remember the name, one of the Wallflowers books or
Yep,
something in
that's
that
exactly
series.
the one. What is it called? I don't know, but it's one of the Wallflower books where the two sisters were both like rich American women.
Yeah, and there's culture shock. So you're creating these two different worlds that these characters can come from, the aristocracy, and then the rich Americans want a title. They want their daughter to be married to a peer of the realm, and that even though they might not have any money, they've got this title that's coveted for reasons that are part of the culture. And so there's the culture shock. Then there is you can contrast it with what you were talking about, like when if it's a woman who maybe is quote unquote loose morals for that time or is viewed as is much more open and like maybe more feminist, and a writer wants to write Regency but wants to do it from a modern lens, which a lot of writers are doing. Then you can choose to focus on different things. Like Courtney Milan will choose to focus on like the one female chemist, or like one of 10 or however many there were, the female blacksmith. Like there were a few, so you can
Mhm.
find those people who buck the norm in that time. And the story is then about them not being accepted by society, or how they're odd or different, or a blue stocking. That's what they would call the
I
women
love
who are
that
interested
word.
in reading and education, and that was looked down on, like, oh, she's a blue stocking, but they were rebels kind of, or at least out of the norm. And so you have to build the world so that the reader, who might not have read a million historical novels, if they come to your book and it's the first, then they have to understand, okay, in this version of the world, being smart for a woman is bad and reading books is looked down on, and you're building that and you're creating that. And so maybe the hero has to overlook her, or be endeared by her tendency to be a blue stocking and to collect animals and books.
That's so interesting too, because historical romance is still incredibly popular in the present day, but with those modifications that
Mhm.
Courtney Milan will make. And then you'll see women will or authors will write romantasy where they're exploring some of the same things, but women have more power. And
Mhm.
then there's also like erotic romances or like steamy contemporaries where we're not dealing with those things. We're dealing with the modern world, but there's still constraints that are placed
Mhm.
upon where you grew up, what class you grew up in. Those are still there.
Yeah, and contemporary stories, which I think are hardest to write because you don't have, it's not two warring werewolf clans, and it's not, a duke trying to marry a scullery maid or whatever. Like, okay, in the modern day, why can't these people be together? That show, that Netflix show that you made me watch with the rabbi and the non-Jewish woman, what is it called? Nobody Wants This?
Nobody wants this.
Yeah, that was a great example of a modern situation.
Mhm.
You don't get a lot of that. Even like religion, it's like, wow, oh, Jews and Christians marry all the time, or atheists, like,
Girlfriend was the atheist, yeah.
yeah, but like, non-Jewish people, like that's very common. But
Mhm.
you put him as a rabbi trying to become the head rabbi. Now you get much more
Mhm.
conflict.
Oh, so much
Now
more conflict.
yeah, it's like juicy, and you're like, okay, that was a really great setup for romantic tension. And with a few strokes, like I don't know that much about Judaism, but it was very clear from what's presented. These are their values. This is the culture. This is the setup, and you buy in and you believe it. And then you kind of create situations like she in the first or second episode, she goes to the temple where he is giving the service. I don't know what you call it. He's leading the congregation at the temple, and like she walks in, and they do it visually too. Like she's
Mhm.
wearing red dress, and everybody else is wearing black. She's always in a color, and everyone else is kind of in darker colors. And and visually, it's easier to do that. But you can do the same thing when you're writing with the word choices and the voice of the characters, contrasting it with everybody else. And
That's such a that's such a point about visually because both you and I were trained in the visual arts. You in film, me in television, but we got a lot of the same lessons. And when I was teaching media production, I used to do this assignment called the location drama, where my students they couldn't use any dialogue, but they had to give the mood and the tone and the place and time of
mm,
a setting just with shots of where it is. So maybe they showed shots of a door opening and a low angle of feet walking down a street. And then you see like a school and it was like a kid on their way to school, but you got that because of their shot choices. And I
yeah.
think I think that's a really great exercise for writers, for us who are wordsmiths to do. Like sometimes get away from the paper, get away from the desk, and
Mm.
go out in the world, or maybe go in your imagination if you're, flying spaceships in a sci-fi. But think about like what you would have to show in order for the reader to understand this world that you've created.
I think that is a kind of a cool exercise because, yeah, coming from film, I'm thinking I see it visually. So sometimes I'm frustrated because I'm like, oh, this would be so easy if I had a camera. Like, I don't need any dialogue. I could just show these shots and I could get across what I'm trying to get across. But now I have to figure out how to turn that into words. But like, if that's not how you were trained, figure out what, without any words, what images would show this tension. Like, how do you create tension? And it might be harder if you haven't studied like film language and what things mean. It just brought to mind, I started watching, I had not finished watching this movie. I watched half of it and I needed a break. Poor Things, which had been nominated for a bunch of Oscars. Inez is making a
I
face.
heard that, yeah, I'm making a face because I had heard that the love scenes were traumatic for people.
Well, the ones I've seen in the first half aren't dramatic. They're kind of hilarious and
Oh
interesting.
no.
But the movie is very bizarre. And because, in film school, you learn like a certain film language, like medium shots, wide shots, close ups, low angles, high angles, they have a meaning. We understand
Mhm,
it from 200 years almost of
mhm.
filmmaking. And this director throws that all out the window.
Oh, I couldn't handle it.
Fish eyes everywhere. The angles
Ooh.
mean nothing. It's all very, to me, it's very,
How Hartley?
not at all.
You
How
guys
Hartley,
probably don't understand that I just insulted Leslye.
yes. Hal Hartley is an independent film director who was my favorite director for many years. I wish you not to disparage his name. Uh, no, but it was very pretentious. It was like, I'm going to
Mm.
like eschew all of the rules that have been in place since the 1800s that we understand filmmaking to be. And I was trying to discern a purpose for these different shots. Sometimes you're looking through a keyhole or a peephole, then you have this really wide angle and a fisheye lens, and then you're down and you're up. And I couldn't, I mean, I only watched half of the movie one time. So maybe you can study this in a class and they will figure out what he meant by each type of shot.
Did
But
it
it
win?
was, I don't think it won. I don't remember. I remember being nominated, but don't quote me on that because I don't really pay attention to the Oscars anymore. Uh, yeah. So there's, if you're doing experimental things, and a lot of people seem to like that movie a lot, I guess. I mean, the performances are interesting. I haven't figured out what the point of the movie is yet, because maybe when I actually finish watching it one day. But I think that if you're trying to write like popular commercial genre fiction, then adhering
Yeah.
to the things that people know and expect is not the worst thing in the world to do. And like,
Because I think with film you're escaping too, but definitely in Romance Landia, you come to the page for escape.
right.
And you allow some leeway, but we really want that tried and true recipe.
We want that emotion to be consistent. I think we're perfectly willing to have someone innovate in a cool way that doesn't make us uncomfortable or want to throw our books across the room. 'Cause there
Mhm.
are those stories too, and people are trying to push the envelope. But yeah, in romance, if you know your reader, you know what they want. And so you're going to that's why we have tropes and that's why we love them. But we're trying
Mhm.
to do it well and try to show people the same but different. We always want it a little bit different because it's easy to get bored, especially when you read a lot of romance. So I think the beloved authors find a way to do the same thing in their own unique way, putting their own spin on it.
So we've been giving a lot of television and film examples. You got any examples from Romance Landia?
Absolutely. Yes. Plenty of examples. If you look at any probably romance novel that you love, then they're probably using the setting and the world to enhance the romance and the conflict and the emotions. So, like Romantasy Queen Sarah J. Maas, when she gets to the romance in the Court of Mist and Fury,
No comment.
so she has the night court with the Fae, and there's that develops the relationship between the two main characters. Farah has been through a lot in the first book, and she goes through a lot in that book too. But that conflict between these kind of two opposite forces and the power and the magic and the mystery and then sort of the glamour of it all um, really reinforces things. I think if you look at like Outlander, when Claire goes back in time to the Scottish Highlands, that has its own unique rules and culture that she has to assimilate to. So it's like a difficult landscape. And the way that they live, the way that they war and fight, it's intense. They have an intense relationship. There's lots of danger, and that's part of the plot, but it's also part of the world, and it's part of the love story. Like Fourth Wing. So you're in this battle college for dragon riders, it's high stakes, danger, people are dying left and right. And you have this kind of high stakes enemies to lovers romance that goes into it. And then you add enforced proximity with the main characters. And so it's like, yeah, they're absolutely the worst person to be around, but they have to be close to each other for, I'm not going to spoil it if you haven't read it, but like, yes, reasons. Um, and then if we take it to like historical Pride and Prejudice, kind of talked about that. Like those five sisters, somebody's got to get married. And because of the rules of the land, but you have these the balls and the settings. It's lower stakes, it seems, because we're not talking about dragon battles, but it's very much for these people, it's high stakes because if nobody gets married, they get kicked out of their house and they're going to be penniless in the streets. Um, and so social class differences create that romantic tension. It's the whole reason why Darcy makes his speech in the letter that, he doesn't really want to be doing this because she's not of the proper class and she's probably uncouth and all of that is in his head. And she's like, well,
Technically, her family is uncouth.
her family's uncouth. And she's like, well, F you too. And like Hating Game, which I love to use because it's a contemporary example of creating a world inside a corporation, inside an office. There is a whole world inside of that office. And there
Mhm.
are two opposing factions, these two publishing companies that have been forced to merge. And so you have this tension, these opposites attract, that is exemplified not only in the characters, but in their corporate cultures, which is just a
Mhm.
different take on, fighting clans, like fighting publishing companies inside the same company.
That is one of the only love stories where I like the book and the film equally. I
Really?
will read the book and then go and watch the film, or watch the film and then go and read the book.
The movie did grow on me. Like, I loved the book. I read the book twice in a row, basically. I think the second time I saw the movie, I liked it a little bit more. But
Mm,
for me, yeah, movies are tough when I love a book because they're different. They
mm.
have to be
'Cause
different.
it's in your head and you shot it.
Yeah, and my heart is best. So when you're choosing your setting, and even as you're building your entire world, I think that it helps to think about these settings as metaphors to have them do more work. So you can set your book in a variety of places and it might work, but if it's really important, like the best, I think the most impactful stories are where you can't to have it be anywhere else. Like ideally, you want your scene, your book to take place in a location where it couldn't happen anywhere else. So using metaphors for the settings is a way to do that. Like, an empty abandoned house being loneliness, or making a character feel lost, or if they're in a bustling market, and that could reflect joy and chaotic feelings of love. If you're with someone and they're making you feel chaotic, and the setting is like a lonely abandoned house, that feels like a mismatch or a missed opportunity, unless you have some really important reason for setting it there. You can have like enchanted forests that are magical and intriguing and alluring, and they can represent newness and excitement and love. Or like old crumbling Gothic cathedrals or castles could be inner turmoil or fear or vulnerability. So matching up emotions with setting, and also like weather, that's another way to do it, to just inject something to have it work on multiple levels. So you've got the conflict, you've got the emotion. If the setting and even the weather can reflect that, then you're doing a lot with the materials that you have, and you're making them do double duty, which I'm always a big fan of.
That's really interesting, what you said about where you place things. That sometimes that can be the only place. I think that so one of my favorite examples to use whenever someone is asking me, how do I write all of these love scenes? How do I write all these banging scenes? Is taking a look at 50 Shades of Grey, the film, because I remember it better because Jamie Dornan. But if you take a look at the love scenes in the film, it becomes really interesting. So if you remember the film 50 Shades of Grey, the film book, um, Christian Grey is a sexual dominant, and he wants to have a dominant submissive relationship with Anna, right?
Mhm.
But Anna is like completely, not only is she vanilla, she's virgin vanilla. She's never done anything before. And he's having this conversation with her in his Red Room of Pain, his sex dungeon,
Mhm.
which is in a dungeon. It's like on the first floor of his condo. I know.
I wonder if dungeons are ever actually like in the basement. I don't know.
I don't know either. But so they're having that conversation in there. And I've talked a lot about triphase cycles and how when you're having a triphase cycle, that you're heightening the conflict, but you're also moving the emotional arc, and your characters are growing. So if you look at that first setting where they're having that conversation, because Anna wants to date this guy, but he's like, okay, but I don't date. I bang, and I bang here in this room. So they're having this conversation. He finds out that she's a virgin. He's like, okay, then let's fix this problem. And they don't fix the problem in his dungeon. He takes her to his bedroom, so they change the setting from
Mhm.
where he's in control to have a specific experience in his dungeon, and he takes her to his bed where he doesn't take anybody else. So in a sense, that makes her first time special. It makes their all their time together, this first sexual experience, her first period, his first with her, it's special, right?
Mhm.
Then if you remember, again, the film, because Jamie Dornan, if you remember, Anna wakes up alone in the bed. She hears the piano playing, and she goes out to find him playing the piano by himself. And she's trying to touch him and get close to him. And remember, Christian has some serious childhood trauma and touches hard for him. And he stops her touch. He basically guides her hands where he wants them to go. He lifts her up and he takes her off screen. And you know they're going to bang again. But I often wonder, like, where, because they don't show it, like, where did he take her to bang? You
Oh,
know, he didn't take her back to the Red Room of Pain. He
right.
probably took her back to the bedroom, which again, Anna probably thinks she's winning in that moment because she doesn't want to be a sexual submissive. She wants to be his girlfriend. But he still wants to put some barriers. So even though
Mhm.
he might not be taking them to the Red Room of Pain, he goes back to their bedroom. And if you sit down and you chart the locations of where those two bang in that film, there's a part where they're in the boardroom where they're discussing the sex contract that they have, but they're sitting at different ends of the table. Again, he's trying to control the pace of their relationship, but she's trying to wrench some control back for herself. There's
Mhm.
another time where they're in her bedroom, but he's not being gentle with her. And she's realizing, oh, I like this. So the settings of where they are keep changing. And the
Mhm.
last setting one of the last settings happens in that Red Room of Pain,
Mhm.
the last one in the first movie. And it sends the relationship off the cliff. So he gets his goal,
Mhm.
but because of where the location took place,
Mhm.
he actually lost control because she did not like it at all. And she's
Oh.
like, I'm done. I'm out. So I always like to prove to people that erotic romance isn't just about let's bang. It's like, where do you bang? How do you bang? Why are you banging at this particular point in
Your
time?
use of the term bang is throwing me. It's
We're trying
hilarious.
to, not get the censors on our back.
What I think is interesting is that, like, think about power, like in his bedroom, he's still in control, but in her
Mhm.
bedroom, and I don't remember the movie that much, but I'm assuming her bedroom is probably like kind of frilly and girly. You have the juxtaposition of that if they
Yep.
do sort of harder things, and
Yeah.
then so you can meet expectations or be like oppose the expectations
Yes.
in the setting, and even and they for different purposes. And then if they're negotiating in this boardroom a sex contract, it's like, yes, negotiations happen in here, but what they're negotiating gives you a sense of
Yes.
irony. And but it's still like a metaphor for this is being very businesslike and orderly, and this is a contract. And S&M or BDSM relationships are very contractual and very much about consent in
Yes.
real life. So yeah,
I get really frustrated when a book feels like a one act play to me. Not a one act, like a
mm.
one scene play.
Like one location, right?
Yes, or 2 even. I
Yeah.
was reading an author that I really, really like, and the story was super interesting, but the story basically took place either in her college bedroom or in his castle because he was like a fake king, but there were no servants around. They never went outside to see the other fairies and fake hind. It was
Hmm.
either in her college room
Yeah.
or his and I was like, you have a whole world and all you're showing us is these 2 locations.
Right. Yeah. Missed opportunity
Yes.
because the locations could do so much to help convey the emotion. And yeah, like if you were visualizing it, if they even if they're apart for a time, like where are they when they're apart? How can you show the emotions of the characters without telling us, oh, she's sad, or she's taking a walk in the woods, like show us with the trees and the birds or like the shadows, and show us the emotion with the things that are around. Just like good craftiness with your writing.
Completely agree.
And just like that, you can also, create that romantic tension that we're always trying to have with the places that things are set. So you kind of talked about 50 Shades of Grey. There's a lot of romantic tension, especially like if we're in like a nice frilly girly bedroom. And that's when she has this awakening that, wait, I actually do like non-vanilla sex. That is going to give us, it adds to the tension, as opposed to if you're just in the Red Room of Pain, like that's very expected. I guess you're going to go in there and you're going to have some sort of S&M type sexual experience that that's what it's for. But when you have it in a place where it doesn't seem like it's for, extra tension. So that's kind of why you have forced proximity as a trope. It gets people together
Mm.
in hopefully unusual locations. I did a short story that's forced proximity in a basement during an earthquake. I love elevator stories, forced proximity. Like, you're in an elevator and the power goes out and you're in the dark. Laura Kay has a great one. There's other good ones.
You know which one I think you would like? Lisa Vino and Renee Rose, their very first Bad Boy Alpha book. It's
Hmm.
an elevator romance, but the heroine is a coder
Oh, yeah, I will have to check that
and the
out.
hero's a werewolf.
Even better. And then having your environment present obstacles that forces characters, especially opposites, to cooperate. And so when even like in Fourth Wing, that forced proximity, they have to be together for reasons. And they do not like each other. And she's been warned to stay away from him at the beginning. That's why we love forced proximity, because it the setting and the situation forces them together and they're going to find common ground, and they're already attracted to each other 99.9% of the time. So they're just going to have lots of things sparking off. So yeah, I love that kind of stuff. Unfamiliar settings, it creates vulnerability for one or more of the characters. And that's another way that you can cut the tension. I mean, vulnerability can increase tension and also cut tension depending on the characters and the character development and what you're trying to do. So another way to use your settings and use your world um, is to have these sensory details. We talked a little bit about this, but when you're describing things, bringing the settings to life, choosing the words that you're using and the sensory details that you are including in your fiction is going to give us that emotion. So use all of your senses. What does it smell like? What are they hearing in the distance? Are they hearing bird songs? Are they hearing weird, scary, creepy howling from some sort of monster? What do things feel like in addition to what they see and touch? So all the senses, and because we don't use smell as much in writing,
Yeah.
I find that I always have to consciously remind myself to be like, okay, what does he smell like? What does she smell like? People have sense, like we're attracted to each other. There's pheromones that I don't think we really consciously understand, but there's cologne, there's soap, there's just the laundry detergent. Sometimes things smell really good on certain people, and we're really attracted to that. Uh, and I try to put that in, like, okay, what does my hero smell like to my heroine? And then bringing that back again and again so that when she smells, in my last book, it was like cedars and apple. And it was this cologne that he had, but like she would just smell an apple. He's not even there. And she's having, Pavlovian responses to the scent that reminds her of him. And that is another detail. And then if you can tie that into some larger world building detail, especially if you're doing fantasy or science fiction that has to do with either the magic system or something like economics, or like we have an embargo on the apples, so there's no way for him to have the apples. I like doing stuff like that.
Okay.
And I guess when you get to your banging scenes, as in it's like, it's just, I don't know if I've ever actually used that word in real life. How do you create like romantic tension? Another way to think about love scenes, spicy scenes, is, and if you have to write a lot of them, if you're doing a lot of romance novels, it's not just like positions and acts. It's also the other details that go into it that make something that can, raise it or lower it. Is it a danger bang? Like, are they
Yeah.
on the run and they don't have much time, or do they have, they're gotten married? It's a marriage of convenience, and this is the first time together, and you
Mm.
really want to draw it out, and you want all of those details, and you want the lighting and the candles or the moonlight or the music or the
Mhm.
rain or something like that. And are they supposed to be falling in love now, or are they adversarial, and it's going to, the rest of the story is about them actually having the emotions? Are you trying to make it like super hot and erotic, or is it more sweeter, still spicy but sweeter? All of these things, you're using the details, you're using the setting. Is it, and people are getting have always been very creative about where they do their love scenes. Like, to the point where I'm like, that sounds really uncomfortable. Like anytime you're outside on the ground and people are like, I don't care. I'm so, into it that the rocks against my back don't matter to me. And I'm like, I think they would matter. But you're showing something by setting things in different places. I try in my books to find something reasonably comfortable for them to use when they're having a love scene. I'm not going to do it against tree bark or like on a sandy beach because that sounds uncomfortable to me and it pulls me out even writing it. But that's just my own pet peeve.
Some people get really frustrated. I think there can be a downside to this too. Some people get really frustrated because they start to think about, they start like clocking things like, oh my gosh, it's been 3 days. They've been on the road. They haven't washed. They haven't brushed their teeth. I'm like,
Yes.
it's been over a month. Has she had her menses? You haven't brought that up yet.
Right. Yeah.
All the details.
Yeah, there's like levels and different readers are going to have different levels. Like I long ago stopped thinking about that. I mean, it's in my head, but I
Mhm.
understand, we don't want a long discourse on how
Going to
they're
the
going to the
bathroom
bathroom.
every morning.
Right. Yeah. Like, okay, what is the sewage system like? And
Right?
I mean, in a fantasy, I'm curious because I think that's interesting,
Childhood.
but like, it doesn't always fit. And usually there's some sort of throwaway line, or even birth control. I think that something like birth control,
Mm.
because usually you have some sort of in a fantasy, you'll have some, special leaf, special
Mhm.
tea, a
Mm.
magic spell, an amulet. I don't know. I think something like that, a lot of people will include that because of the obvious consequences, and just because pregnancy can be a plot. So if you didn't address how they weren't getting
Mhm.
pregnant, how are you going to address that they are getting pregnant when
Mhm.
they're married and having their happily ever after? So some things we want to include, and some things I like it because it feels more real to me when they just have a passing mention of, yeah, and I had my monthly and I used the rags or whatever. Someone has to wash those out. All right, we don't have to go into detail.
Thank you.
But part of world building is kind of at least thinking through those things, even if you're not going to put it on the page, so that you could have just a passing glance of the moon tea that they're drinking, or I
Mhm.
can't get the moon tea, so we have to do other things tonight
Mhm.
because we don't want any consequences. You could have that as a plot point too, like, okay, let's get creative because,
Or
you
they
know,
can't even get married yet because they
yeah,
have to wait.
right, right. And
I
even like,
did read a book like that. It was a Mila Vane book,
mm,
and they couldn't do anything until a certain, it was like a certain phase of the moon, or they would anger the gods.
oh, okay, cool, even better. So hopefully this kind of just helped you think more about where you're setting things, how you're doing your world building, and different ways that you can think about using that to increase your romantic tension and to increase the emotion of the characters, to reinforce your romance, what's keeping them apart, and then even what brings them together in the third act. All of you can build in so much by tweaking world building aspects. And if you get
Mhm.
stuck, sometimes it's like, well, what do I need? What kind of rule or magic or cultural aspect do I need? Did I not bring forth? Can I invent? Can I find if I'm doing something in contemporary or historical to make this make more sense, to make it even more impactful, to deepen it? Because you want people to really connect with these characters and to be attached to the outcome of their love story, ideally. So these are like subtle tweaks that you can make on I mentioned this dial, this like mixing board of your novel, and you're, tweaking character development and you're tweaking plot and conflict and tension and sensory descriptions and adverbs, maybe turn them down, and action verbs and all these things. They're all part of the tool belt that we have. So how can you like really focus and fine tune some of these things for an effect that can be subtle or can be really, really intense, depending on how you do it.
I wish there was a class for this.
I do have a world building
You
class.
do?
Imagine that. If you would like to learn more about world building from me, Imaginary World Building is my course. It is self-paced. It's available at myimaginaryfriends.net all the time. And there might be another cohort coming in early 2025. We will see. So
Yay.
Get on the newsletter to
It's the
find out.
best when you can learn with the teacher.
Right?
Some people like me need to be by myself, and then some people need the community to give them a hug.
Yeah, and to whip them into shape sometimes.
Yes. So this was a magical conversation, and I'm curious to know, has there been any everyday magic in your life, Leslye?
There has, yeah. I've been on my mini world tour of multiple trips. So I was in Niagara Falls about a week and a half ago for the World Fantasy Convention, and it was my first time at Niagara Falls. And we went up to paid like $1 to go to the observation deck, stayed on the New York side, and did not make it to Canada. But even from there, and I've heard the Canadian side is better, but the New York side was still gorgeous. And just standing there, looking at the falls, there's a lot of people around, but like it's just amazing just to see all of that. And earlier that day, I had gone they have this underground railroad museum that's literally in the Amtrak station.
Oh, wow.
So imagine, I did not expect that. It's very small, but I didn't realize that Niagara Falls was such a hub. Like I knew you're going north. The people who want to escape slavery are going to go to Canada. This is a main place where they were crossing because there was a bridge and there were a lot of free Black people who were helping people cross over and learning about that, then going to see the falls and kind of seeing the steps that they went down. And at that time, they were going across in a boat. All kind of combined together, like that history, the like majesticness of the falls and the beauty of them. And yeah, it was really magical. What about you, Inez? Any everyday magic in your world?
I'm still riding high from my time at RAM.
She's a romance author mastermind.
Romance Author Mastermind. And during that, I got to hang out with some of the authors that I'm going to be doing a shared world with in 2025, which I'm so excited about. And we just had our first writers roundtable. So I come from TV, so you didn't really write by yourself in TV. And not always at a table, but you would talk to the other writers that were writing in the season with you. And I worked at National Geographic, and their roundtable was like, it was smart people that had to write what they call the blue chip documentaries, where they were basically anthropomorphizing animals and giving them human feelings.
All
And
right.
so I just remember like how well read these people were, and how they
Mhm.
were like comparing like monkeys and bears to Lilliputians. And I'm just like, wow.
To Lilliputians? From
Yes.
Gulliver's Travels?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I remember her first name, Eleanor Grant. Eleanor Grant. I will never forget that woman. I just was looking at her like, you are so smart. Anyway, so part of this world that I am building with these other authors is I'm trying to make sure, even though I just said that I am an introvert. I like my solitude. I really do. But then when I come out of my shell and growl at the sun and all that and scratch my butt, I like to create with other people. And one of the reasons why I like to create with other people is because I know that they're going to have ideas that I didn't even think of. And so
Mhm.
that's what was happening during this roundtable. I kept saying, I have built a snow globe. Here are your boundaries. Let's go. And it was just wonderful. And I just love working with people who don't have big egos. I swear, everybody that was supposed to be in this group has showed up in this group. And we're all about, how are we going to make the story, this world, these characters the best that we can make them. And I'm just riding on a creative high. That's the magic that I'm experiencing right now.
That is lovely. It's always great to have that sort of creative inspiration in real life that can feed you for a little while. Yay.
Yay, lovely things. And guys, I hope that you are having some everyday magic in your lives. Thank you so much for joining us. Please let us know what you think. You can leave a comment on YouTube with your thoughts on this episode. Please share it with a friend who loves romance. And don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
And you can always check out our book schedule on our website, inkandmagic.net, to read along with us as we continue our journey through the Side Changeling universe from Nalini Singh. And we will see you next time.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.